The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the Texas countryside as Marco Hernandez guided his 10-year-old niece, Sophia, through the entrance of the county fair. The smell of popcorn, cotton candy, and grilled meat filled the air, and Sophia's eyes were wide with excitement as she took in the sights and sounds. And this year, it was special for Marco. Having recently retired from the Army, he was grateful for the opportunity to spend quality time with his niece. Marco's peaceful moment was interrupted by the low rumble of motorcycles approaching the fairground entrance. For men rolled in on Harley-Davidson bikes, each clad in black leather vests bearing an insignia on the back. The logo was a crude skull encircled by flames, and the words Hellfire Brotherhood were scrawled above it. Marco had seen similar insignias before, worn by biker gangs known for stirring up trouble. His instinct sharpened, his eyes tracking their movements as they dismounted. The bikers, led by a tall, wiry man with a scar across his face, ambled into the fair with an air of entitlement. They moved with a swagger, loud and brash, making little effort to fit in with the fair's cheerful, family-oriented atmosphere. Marco watched as they bypassed the ticket booth, scoffing at the fair volunteer who tried to stop them. "Look at these clowns," one of the bikers jeered, a grin twisting his mouth. The others laughed, nudging each other as they scanned the crowd with an unsettling gleam in their eyes. The group split up, weaving through the crowd and making their presence felt in subtle but intimidating ways. Sophia noticed her uncle's gaze harden and tugged on his sleeve. "Uncle Marco, are you okay?" He forced a smile, keeping his tone light. "I'm fine, Mija. Just keeping an eye on things. Are those guys bad?" she asked innocently. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes people forget how to be good," he said softly, giving her a reassuring smile. "But don't worry. We're here to have fun, right?" Sophia nodded, satisfied, and they resumed their exploration of the fair. But Marco kept an eye on the bikers, his senses on alert. He wasn't one to invite trouble, but he had a feeling that trouble had arrived, whether he liked it or not. The fair continued as usual, but the bikers' presence cast a shadow over the atmosphere. Marco noticed them at various spots around the fairgrounds, their loud voices and crude language attracting irritated glances from other attendees. The group seemed to take pleasure in creating discomfort, bumping into people, mocking the games, and generally stirring up trouble. At one point, Marco watched as the scar-faced leader of the group sauntered up to a game booth where a young couple was attempting to win a prize. He leaned over the counter, leering at the booth attendant, a timid teenage girl. "Why don't you give me one of those teddy bears, sweetheart?" he drawled, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The girl hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. "Sir, you have to win the game to get a prize." The biker chuckled, reaching across the counter to grab one of the stuffed animals. "Who's gonna stop me?" he sneered. The girl glanced around, but there was no one nearby willing to intervene. Marco clenched his jaw, holding back for Sophia's sake. He didn't want to expose her to a confrontation unless absolutely necessary. Meanwhile, Sophia had noticed a booth selling colorful balloons and was tugging on Marco's arm. "Can I get a balloon, Uncle Marco?" "Please." Marco nodded, tearing his gaze away from the bikers. "Sure thing, Mija. Let's get you the biggest one they have." As they walked to the balloon booth, he kept Sophia close, his mind working over the possible scenarios that might unfold. He had spent his life facing threats in some of the most dangerous places in the world, but the idea of a quiet day at the fair turning into a potential scene of violence weighed heavily on him. As the afternoon wore on, Marco and Sophia were seated near the food court, enjoying lemonade, when the bikers began causing trouble again. This time, their target was an elderly vendor who sold small, handcrafted items. The scarred biker laughed as he knocked over a display, scattering the trinkets across the ground. Sophia looked up, her eyes wide with concern. "Why are they doing that?" Marco took a deep breath, feeling his patience wane. He knew it was time to step in, but he didn't want Sophia to see him confront them directly. "Sophia, stay right here, okay? I'm just going to help that man pick up his things." Sophia nodded, watching as Marco walked over to the vendor, crouching down to gather the scattered items. The scarred biker sneered at Marco, sizing him up. "What's your problem, old man?" Marco stood, meeting the biker's gaze with calm, unflinching resolve. "Leave him alone. There's no need to make a scene here." The biker chuckled, looking over his shoulder at his companions, who were watching with smirks on their faces. "And who's gonna make me?" "You?" Marco didn't respond. Instead, he maintained eye contact, his stance relaxed yet ready. The tension between them was palpable, and a few fairgoers nearby began to notice, watching with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The standoff reached its peak when one of the other bikers joined in, his hand resting casually on a concealed knife at his waist. Marco's military training kicked in, his senses heightened as he evaluated their positions and possible moves. Just as things seemed ready to boil over, a security guard arrived, his voice shaky but firm. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" The bikers exchanged glances, seeming to weigh their options. After a tense moment, the scar-faced leader scoffed and motioned for his gang to back off. "No problem. We were just leaving." They slinked away, muttering curses under their breath, while Marco remained where he was, watching them until they were out of sight. The fairgoers around them breathed a collective sigh of relief, and the elderly vendor thanked Marco profusely. "Thank you, sir. I didn't know what I was going to do." Marco nodded, his focus still on Sophia, who was watching him with wide eyes. "You're welcome. Just stay safe out here." As the sun began to set over the fairgrounds, casting a warm amber glow across the festivities, Marco tried to put the earlier encounter out of his mind. He and Sophia wandered through the exhibits, admiring the prize-winning livestock and checking out the arts and crafts booths. Sophia had picked out a pink balloon shaped like a unicorn, which she proudly held in her hand as they strolled. "Are we going on the Ferris wheel, Uncle Marco?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. Marco chuckled, squeezing her hand. "Of course, Mija. That's the best part of the fair." They reached the Ferris wheel and joined the short line, the excitement in Sophia's eyes mirrored by Marco's quiet satisfaction. He felt grateful for these moments, knowing he had missed so many while deployed. Here, under the orange and pink hues of the Texas sky, it seemed like nothing could ruin this moment. But then, Marco noticed movement at the edge of the fairground near the motorcycle parking lot. His heart sank as he recognized the group of bikers returning, their faces dark with anger. They must have regrouped and decided they weren't done causing trouble. The leader, Scarface, looked straight at Marco from across the lot and gave him a mocking salute. Marco's muscles tensed as he realized they were heading toward him, their expressions a mix of irritation and amusement, as if daring him to intervene again. "Uncle Marco?" Sophia's voice brought him back to the moment. He forced a reassuring smile, giving her hand a comforting squeeze. "Actually, Sophia, let's hold off on the Ferris wheel for a few minutes. How about some popcorn?" Sophia pouted, disappointed, but nodded, trusting her uncle's judgment. As they walked away from the Ferris wheel, Marco glanced over his shoulder, mentally preparing for the confrontation he knew was inevitable. Marco guided Sophia to a bench near the edge of the fairgrounds, choosing a spot where he could keep her safe and still have a clear view of the approaching bikers. He knelt to her level, his voice calm but serious. "Sophia, listen to me. I need you to stay right here. Don't move, okay?" Sophia's eyes widened as she picked up on the tension in his voice. "Is something wrong, Uncle Marco?" He hesitated, not wanting to frighten her. "Everything's fine, Mija. Just stay here for a minute." He turned to face the bikers, who were only a few yards away now. The scarred leader sneered, his gaze locked on Marco. "Didn't think we'd let you get away with that, did you?" The biker taunted, his voice dripping with malice. Marco kept his tone measured. "This is a family event. Why don't you leave while you still can?" The leader scoffed, glancing back at his friends for encouragement. Big words for a washed-up soldier. "You think you're some kind of hero?" One of the bikers, a hulking man with tattoos snaking up his arms, stepped forward, fists clenched. "I say we teach this guy a lesson." The fairgoers nearby began to notice the tension and quickly moved away, forming a loose circle around Marco and the bikers, whispering nervously. Marco's military instincts sharpened as he assessed the situation, calculating his moves if it came to a fight. "I'm not looking for trouble," Marco said, his tone steady but firm. "But I won't let you cause it here." The bikers laughed, their voices cruel and mocking. They took a few steps closer, emboldened by the crowd's nervous silence. Marco shifted his stance, bracing himself. He wasn't one to provoke violence, but he wasn't about to back down either. Just as the bikers moved to close the distance, a voice cut through the crowd. "Leave him alone." A fair security guard, a young man with a nervous expression but a determined look in his eyes, stepped forward. His uniform was slightly too large, and he was clearly new to the job, but his stance was firm as he addressed the bikers. The leader turned to him, grinning. "Oh, look, they sent a rookie. This your first day, kid?" The guard swallowed, his voice wavering slightly. "It doesn't matter. You're causing trouble, and we're asking you to leave." The bikers exchanged looks of amusement, but Marco saw the guard's resolve harden, and he felt a surge of respect for the young man. Taking a stand in the face of intimidation wasn't easy, especially for someone with little experience. "Listen to him," Marco said, his voice steady and low. "It's time for you to leave." For a moment, it seemed the bikers would back down. But then, with a sudden movement, one of them lunged at the guard, his fist raised. The young man flinched, stumbling back, and the crowd gasped in fear. Marco acted on instinct, stepping forward to intercept the blow. He deflected the punch with a swift movement, grabbing the biker's arm and twisting it behind his back. The biker cursed, struggling against Marco's grip, but Marco held firm. "Enough." Marco's voice rang out, firm and unyielding. "The next person who throws a punch will regret it." The crowd watched in stunned silence, and even the bikers hesitated, suddenly unsure. The scarred leader's bravado faltered as he took a step back, realizing they were losing control of the situation. "Let's go," he muttered to his friends, his tone bitter. They cast one last, hateful glare at Marco before turning and retreating toward their motorcycles, defeated. As they left, the crowd erupted in applause, relief washing over them. The young security guard looked at Marco with gratitude and admiration. "Thank you, sir," he said, still catching his breath. "I didn't know what I was going to do." Marco patted his shoulder, offering a reassuring smile. "You did well." Standing up to them took guts. Word of Marco's bravery spread quickly through the fairgrounds, and soon people were approaching him to express their thanks. Sophia, still clutching her balloon, looked up at her uncle with awe. "Uncle Marco, you're a hero," she exclaimed, her voice filled with pride. Marco smiled, kneeling down to her level. "I just did what was right, Mija. Sometimes, standing up for others is the most important thing you can do." The fair's organizers came over, expressing their gratitude and offering Marco and Sophia free tickets for the next year's fair. They even arranged for a special mention over the loudspeakers, honoring Marco as the hometown hero of the county fair. As they walked away from the crowd, Sophia looked up at Marco, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Uncle Marco, do you think those guys will ever be nice?" Marco sighed, considering his answer. "People can change if they want to. Sometimes it just takes someone showing them the right way." Sophia nodded, seemingly satisfied, and took his hand. "I'm glad you're my uncle." The incident at the fair continued to have a ripple effect in the following days. A video of Marco confronting the bikers, taken by a bystander, went viral on social media, with thousands of people sharing it and praising Marco's bravery. News outlets picked up the story, and Marco was even invited to speak at a local veterans event about his experiences and the importance of courage and community. Many veterans in the community, inspired by Marco's actions, began reaching out to one another, forming a network to support each other. Marco took an active role in this network, using his experience to mentor younger veterans who were struggling with the transition to civilian life. His calm demeanor and steady presence became a source of strength for those around him, and he found a new sense of purpose in helping his fellow veterans. One young man, recently discharged from the military and dealing with PTSD, approached Marco after a support group meeting. His voice shook as he explained that he had been avoiding crowded places, too anxious to face the public. But seeing Marco's bravery at the fair had given him a newfound sense of hope. "Thank you, sir," the young man said, his voice filled with sincerity. "You showed me that it's okay to be scared, but that I don't have to let it stop me." Marco put a hand on the young man's shoulder, offering him a reassuring smile. "We're all scared sometimes. Courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing what's right, even when you are. Months passed, and the memory of Marco's actions at the fair became a cherished story in the town. The fairgrounds installed a plaque in Marco's honor, inscribed with the words, "In gratitude to Marco Hernandez, whose courage reminded us all of the strength within our community." Sophia, inspired by her uncle's bravery, chose to write a report about him for her school's hero project. Standing in front of her class, she proudly shared the story of how her uncle had protected others at the fair. Her teacher later called Marco to let him know how proud she was of Sophia's presentation. "Mr. Hernandez, I've never seen Sophia so inspired," the teacher said warmly. "You've set a wonderful example for her and all of us." Marco felt a swell of pride, knowing that the legacy of his actions had become a beacon of hope and courage in his community. One afternoon, as he and Sophia walked through the fairgrounds, now peaceful and empty, Marco noticed the plaque dedicated to him. Sophia looked up at him, a question in her eyes. "Uncle Marco, will you teach me how to be brave like you?" Marco knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "Mija, you already have all the bravery you need. Just remember to be kind, stand up for others, and never be afraid to do what's right."